So everybody would take this long ride home, and it would always just revert back to like, so what's the deal with this Mr. Jokes guy? He pulled me aside and just started sticking at me.
Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Accolades conversation series, in which I talk to some of my favorite artists about who or what they would recommend me checking out. Make sure to subscribe to our channel or hit the like button. Brett Davis is an American comedian and actor. He hosted a public access show called The Special with Brett Davis in the New York City metro area. He has also hosted a podcast for Laundry and the Macaulay Culkin Show. In 2015, he won the Andy Kaufman Award. In 2019, he joined the cast of the National Lampoon Radio Hour. I spoke to Brett about Steve Whalen, a comedian who was part of the New York scene and known by his nickname Mr. Jokes. His persona was that of a fast-paced, self-effacing Catskills comic with a catchphrase of, "I love this crowd." If you didn't know him and are reading this and think that sounds campy, it was. But it was also incredible and fun to watch. A reason to come in from the back room. He put on a show, which not a lot of comedians know how to do. If you are into my illustrations, this project started as an illustration book which you can still get on craterecords.be. This is what Brett had to add.
I'd like to give accolades to someone by the name of Steve Whalen, although he's more affectionately known as Mr. Jokes. He was a New York City comedian throughout the 2000s, 2010s, that I got to work with a lot, particularly on a public access show I did called The Special without Brett Davis, where he was the announcer. I met him through kind of like a bubbling alternative comedy scene. He was doing maybe not alternative comedy, or maybe the most alternative comedy. It's kind of hard to put a pin in it. He was very much like an old school style comedian, someone that you might see in the 60s, 70s, one joke, punchlines are a little cheesy sometimes. Truly, you never quite knew where the line was. I got to know him personally, and I knew that he was truly affectionate about the kind of comedy he was doing. He was like comedy historian, obsessive. He would always be looking up old YouTube clips of people, have like opinions on comedians I've never once considered critically. But then he would take that and bring that same style into, modern New York City, often at alternative comedy shows where that just means people are doing a different style of comedy than your typical observational, dating's weird kind of stuff. When I would put him on shows, he wouldn't always kill, but when he brought it and he knew to bring it, he could win any crowd over. That being said, I also got to see the art of getting there, and a lot of the jokes were very, very bad, which is kind of the fun of it.
When it comes to alternative comedy circles in New York, is that like, how do I need to picture that? Is that like more of an improv kind of crowd, or is that something completely different still?
And it's always changing. New York City comedy right now, I would say there is a stand-up world, and in that stand-up world, there's a lot of different, there's like, oh, these people are maybe like a little more cool. These people are a little more have attitude. There's a wide spectrum there. And then there's like an improv scene and a sketch comedy scene that are usually around a bunch of different theaters and stuff. There is your alternative scene that's maybe a little more art focused, which can also mean it's like the dumbest of the dumb. And Steve kind of like wove his way through all of these scenes. I worked with him at a boring office job for a little while, and he would be like, "Oh man, Staten Island open mic, Mike DePaulis was up there." I'm like, "I don't know who these people are. I'm not in the Staten Island open mic scene." Everybody knew him. He was given the name Mr. Jokes by this guy Jason Signs, who himself was like a stand-up, but also a little more in like the Upright Citizen Brigade theater world of like sketch comedy. And he was just like, you love jokes. You're Mr. Jokes. And then, you get a name like that, which is pretty broad. I think there is another Mr. Jokes in Africa. So, yeah, he was just like everywhere, omnipresent, always very supportive, very open minded. Staten Island is not the most open minded place to come from. And yeah, Steve wasn't the type of person to like virtue signal. He kind of looked like he was your average Joe kind of guy, but was, truly so accepting and so progressive, even when his jokes weren't. He did a lot of, so like Milton Berle style jokes. If Milton Berle was this like 60s comic who put out this book, The Private Joke File, and you could just open it and be like Polish jokes or like women. And then there'd be like 20 pages of just like my wife, da, da, da. I don't know if Steve was stealing some of these jokes wholesale or was just so in that mindset of the way he wrote jokes. And sometimes you would be like, Steve, I don't think we're making Asian jokes like this anymore. Like, well, the punchline isn't that it's that she's Asian. It's that like, no, 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 no.
But so I hear you talk about him in the past tense. So I just see that he died. He was a close friend of yours.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I was the closest friend, but we were certainly very close collaborators. Like I said, I did this public access show where he would come on, and my thing is I do character comedy. So every time I'm on stage, I'm somebody else. And I wanted to bring that to this public access show that we had inherited from the Chris Gethard Show, which he's like a well-known New York comic. And I was like, well, I want to do something different, but we should have one thing that's consistent, and that was Steve. So every time we do a show, he'd come on and do a joke of the week and kind of like bring the show to a halt. He was our announcer too, but then be like, oh, yeah, what time? Oh, it's time for the joke of the week. And then he'd come out and he'd be like, I'm on the paleo diet. Yeah, me and my pal Leo, we go eat mozzarella sticks. And then exit, or like, oh, I just signed up for a Funny or Die, and the funeral is on Monday. And we'd have all these people from different walks of life on this show, often like weirdo celebrities that we could get, everyone ranging from like Michael Shannon, who's, Oscar nominated actor, to like Michael Alec, who was the party monster club kid in the early 90s and killed a guy. And, watching Steve always just like, oh, hey, pal, how you doing? Mr. Jokes. And it was always just so funny. And we'd have this ride back from the show every night, because we did it up in like Columbus Circle, which is like upper Manhattan. And most of us lived in Brooklyn or Queens. So everybody would take this long ride home, and it would always just revert back to like, so what's the deal with this Mr. Jokes guy? He pulled me aside and just started sticking at me. That'd be like, oh, we got our Steve stories. And when he'd do like normal shows, like stand-up shows, he'd be the only guy with a merch table. He'd have these shirts that say, I love this crowd, which was his catchphrase. He would do these crazy live streams where he would just like write a joke web, and you'd actually see like the machinations of how he writes. And they were psychotic. They were just like, what are you doing? You've been doing this for hours.
There are a lot of footage of him on YouTube or like online that I can look into.
Absolutely, yeah. I could send some clips too.
And is there a certain thing, except for the stuff that you did with him, is there a certain thing that you like? You should check out that first, out of all his stuff that he does.
He would make these compilations of himself. He actually put out an album called "I Love This Crowd," that he just like recorded at various open mics and shows and stuff, and like patchworked this whole thing together instead of just doing one standard recording. And actually, when he went to get the album mastered, they were like, wait, what is this? This is like cell phone recordings. It's like $100 a track, and there's 100 tracks on here. So then he just edited them all to one track and said, actually, it's a one-track album. They're like, all right, whatever. They're like a low pass filter on it. They're like, here you go.
Yeah, the other
Um,
thing that I was wondering on, because I interviewed Jake Fogelnest a couple of weeks ago, and he's also coming from that public access TV scene, which is
yeah,
like
he was our first guest
very,
too.
yeah, which is kind of interesting to me. Like we got regional TV, which is something completely different probably. But I always wondered, like, can you explain to like somebody that is not from New York or not from the States what the meaning of public access TV nowadays still is? Because I always thought that was something like in the 90s that is circling around. Like, is that something that still exists and that can still exist, or does it strictly exist online, or how do we need to see that?
Yeah, so public access, if you've seen it on YouTube, it's always cheaply produced, amateur content that's like weirdly somehow aired on television. What happened was PBS, for instance, in the United States came around and they were like, well, we'll dedicate one channel to, being educational and informational. And once cable expanded that, the cable systems that provided MTV or CNN or ESPN, these like niche cable channels, they were told to set aside certain channels for whatever community they were serving. So I did my show on Manhattan Neighborhood Network, which meant that people in New York City could watch this, but it was meant to be used by the citizens of Manhattan, even though I didn't technically live there.
To be able to get on there, you needed to be from Manhattan. That's
We had a producer that lived in Manhattan, so the show was technically his, at least like in name, or the studio time, I guess, was technically his. And Chris Gethard before us had a similar situation. You would go into this TV studio, which was really state of the art. Like the cable companies paid for it. It was akin to what you'd see a major network having. Just the people that were in it and making shows were some of the strangest people you could ever meet. Like, oh, well, my show's about like spirituality, and then you see like, oh, they're like talking to ghosts on their show. I remember being in the studio. They had these edit bays that everybody was working on, looking into one smaller studio where somebody was recording a show, and he just had some woman like rubbing her feet on his face, and he was just like, oh, and I was like, I didn't know if they're recording this. Yeah, so you met a lot of strange characters through it. It's like everybody kind of knew Steve better than me because I was running around and he was just like, holding court. And
but so if I get it right, you need to come with a program and they say yes or no. Or...
basically, it's a public service. So anyone could theoretically have a show, but then they make the barrier of entry incredibly complicated that you'd have to be a crazy person to jump through all the hoops and
Have a woman rub their feet in your face.
yeah, it's like you really need to want that. And we thankfully people had done it through the show that preceded us. We were kind of grandfathered into this setup, and we didn't have to do all the steps necessary. A lot of us still had to go in for like training to use the equipment and stuff, but we snuck in, a little bit easier than some of the other shows that just kind of came in cold. Jake Fogelnest, for instance, like he recorded his show in his apartment, and then they drop off a cassette tape, and they just had to put it on because it's for the public.
I should have asked Jake that, but like if you want to have like access and you're a 14-year-old kid, I can imagine having to like fill in all those papers and stuff like that. You must have been like really dedicated to be able to do this.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm sure he had some help from his parents and stuff. But like he was there, and there were some people that just dropped videos off. The show that would often follow us was just close-ups of butts. Somebody going to like clubs, really just like a zooming in on butts. That was like their late night programming.
Do you know the ratings then afterwards as well?
We never knew the ratings because that's like confidential. They didn't even look at them internally because they didn't want to favor any shows. Obviously, there is some favoring people that are there longer, get better time slots, people that, are doing something a little more serving the public. If you're talking about like, oh, local community organization and stuff, that sort of thing will get favored as opposed to us, doing some weirdo comedy thing. A lot of religious programming, a lot of political talk, and then just bizarro, some of the strangest stuff. I mean, you type in public access TV into YouTube, and you're gonna run the full gamut. The first show we did was actually like an episode of the Chris Gethard Show. He was just off for a week, and we were like, well, we should do the ultimate public access show. And he was like, oh, check out this person, check out this person. And I did this deep dive on all these shows, and I found, oh, this woman who's like a medium, and then like, oh, well, this just like the drollest, dullest person that just is not making any points, but is talking and talking and talking. And then just like elderly people, and then like people that are just like, I'm teaching Spanish. And I just tried to shove them all into one horrible show where I played this like libertarian commenter, but the show had like no clear point. So yeah, it was really fun to do that despite the circumstances being very strange.
Yeah, and also like if you're like in a studio that is apparently like pretty professional, I guess, is it like possible to get like, do you have the tapes afterwards? Do you have
Yeah.
the program yourself afterwards? You can take that home, or like that's yours?
Yeah, so we own the footage. It aired live, and sometimes they'd repeat it. And it would also get sent random places. Some people were like, yeah, we watched it in Toronto. And I was like, how did you watch it in Toronto on TV? Like, cool, I guess. But then, we got to upload it to our YouTube page. And that's where I think the bulk of the people that actually watched it.
It kind of makes sense to me that it existed in the 90s before like internet and YouTube was as big as it is now.
Yeah, I mean, I think our audience was people that were seeking this out, and then a small percentage of strange New Yorkers who just had their TV on all the time and would flip through. We would take calls live on the air just to keep that. Like, there's so many call-in shows in public access history that's always just like people prank calling or strange callers, and I was like, yeah, this is like the one part of the show we truly can't control, so we need to keep it in character. I'm playing with these callers who could be fans of the show or could just be like, why is this on my TV? So that was always very fun.
It's kind of like podcasting, but before it was podcasting kind of thing. In a lot of
For
ways.
sure. There just weren't a lot of outlets, especially in the 90s and 80s, for people to just make things. So public access weirdly kind of opened like a window, and a few people got to come in and make very bizarre content over the years. Just typing in public access to YouTube is going to open up a treasure trove of things that are good, bad, ugly.
I got to know of public access because of watching Tim and Eric and knowing that that was like a spoof or whatever. Like in some ways, it's a concept that is very strange to me, but I love it. Like it's probably the best thing ever. Like I can't imagine like being in the 90s and be like, oh, I can just be in a TV studio and do whatever the fuck I want in some way, which is crazy.
It was the most incredible gift to just be given the keys to the ultimate playground.
It sounds like making a punk zine, but then in a professional setting kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like it's like
we didn't have any budget. We had no money. I was like working day jobs, and like there were times when I was trying to get to the TV show I hosted, and I'd have to like hop the turnstile on the subway because I didn't have the money to get there. It was really fly by the seat of our pants. Being in my 30s now, I probably wouldn't do anything like that ever again.
But it does still exist, right?
It does still exist. So if you're in pretty much anywhere in the United States, at least major cities for sure, you can flip around the channels and you're going to see one strange, lower quality channel that's going to have who knows what on it.
I enjoy doing what I'm doing, and I'm trying to like, with getting older, trying to like only focus on do it and don't look at how many people watch it, but you kind of want to have growth in whatever you're doing as well. I can imagine if you don't know the numbers on the public access TV, that it's probably hard to know like what is our crowd like? Is our crowd like 10 people or is it like 10,000 people? Like it's
I truly couldn't tell you. Like,
Mhm.
that's the people that were watching, I'll probably never speak to. Like I said, people telling me that they watched it on TV in Toronto. It's like, it's truly, yeah, it was frustrating also to be killing myself every week.
Even though I know it doesn't matter if it's 100 or 10,000 people, but it somehow it keeps you going. If you're not getting paid for something, that like you at least
Mhm.
but it's a kind of a romantic idea that you don't have that kind of spectrum to look into. The fun of making things because you don't know anything, and it's I think it's kind of
Yeah.
it's actually better that you don't know the numbers, I guess.
I guess so. Yeah, it certainly guarantees that it's art for art's sake. However frustrating that may be in the moment. And to bring it back to Steve, like he was such a like perfect example of that. Like he, was just constantly making stuff. I don't know if he'd call it DIY, but he was doing some of the most punk stuff, imaginably. Like put out his own album, like DIY, and would do these specials and these videos and stuff. And uh, yeah, like he was on more episodes of this show than I was, because I would take a week off once in a while to like go do a show out of town or for whatever, and he was just like always there, leave sets early and just to make it on time. So like he really cared about the show and like was commit to this and treat it as professionally as possible.
I want to thank Brett for this conversation. On next week's episode, I'm talking to Lydia Gamble from the band Gustav about Mildred Bailey. Thanks for listening, watching, or however you check out Accolades. Give us a thumbs up or follow our channel. See you next week.